Hello and welcome back. It's been quite a while since I've recorded some Magic Online, but I thought I'd jump back into it a little bit. I'm trying some new commanders, as usual. This time I'm on Silas and Ludevic Necro-Alchemist. The partner mechanic is pretty broken in 1v1, and I might as well take advantage of that. These are two of the more innocuous commanders. Silas is fairly niche, getting back artifacts from the graveyard, and Ludevic has the significant downside that your opponent can draw themselves cards if they hurt themselves on their turn. But in total, I think it makes a pretty nice Grixis tempo shell. I'm playing a lot of fairly high impact creatures, such as Leovold, such as Young Pyromancer, Dark Confidant, Glint-Sleeve Siphoner, and Ophiomancer. A lot of Mancers in this deck, as well as the very straightforward, low curve, aggressive cards like Bitter Blossom, Umezawa's Jitte, whatever. So the deck is designed to play a mostly blue-black tempo game, kind of similar to Fairies, but without the Fairies except for a Spell Stutter sprite here, with some concessions to Silas in a few Baubles and Spell Bombs, as well as Hope of Ghirapur, which plays to both of my commander's strengths, as well as some hard control top end in Jace the Mind Sculptor, Ob Nixilis, Bribery, etc. The deck's been performing really well. It takes a long time to kill my opponents, and it has a significant downside of almost killing myself in the process, but it's really fun to play, and the games tend to be pretty tight, and I have a particularly tight one to record today. Okay, so a few things that I see immediately. One, I'm playing against the Bane, who usually plays pretty good decks in my experience, and today they are playing Leovold, Emissary of Trest, which is definitely not a fantastic matchup for me for a variety of reasons. One, this deck tends to play a fair number of creatures, just mid-rangey, good stuff creatures, which my deck isn't fantastic against. If I can't get through on the ground, I won't be able to draw as many cards, and speaking of drawing cards, Leovold does this thing where he doesn't let you do that. And then, last but certainly not least, there's the if I target my opponent or their creatures, they will draw cards, which is not so great against what's a tempo or value deck like this one. But I keep a fairly good hand. I have hand disruption, removal, and threats, so I'm feeling relatively happy about that. I'm going to play turn 1 Duress, finding a counterbalance. Other options here were Telling Time, Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, and Natural State. Telling Time I don't really care about. Natural State I also don't really care about with this hand. Nissa, Voice of Zendikar could be slightly annoying, but Glint-Sleeve Siphoner's Menace should make that not as big a problem as it otherwise could be. Counterbalance is just going to be a general annoyance all game, and I don't have a way of dealing with it immediately, so this seems like a good time for that. My opponent plays their Scalding Tarn. I play my Glint-Sleeve Siphoner, paying down to 26 life. And hopefully this will get me drawing cards to offset their value plays in the future. I can attack in, go up to 2 energy, and play Ludevic, Necro-Alchemist. This will let me immediately draw a card this turn, as my opponent Telling Time's in response for some reason, as well as drawing a card next upkeep with Siphoner. Card that draws Shadow of a Doubt, which is generally nice against the 3-color deck that's usually playing a lot of fetches. Opponent plays Leovold, which would prevent me from getting the extra draw of Siphoner, but I have removal for that with Grasp of Darkness. And I do not find a land, sadly, so I can't keep up, Go for the Throat, or Shadow of Doubt this turn. That said, I do find a Night's Whisper on the end step, so hopefully I can find a land next turn. My opponent plays Cavern of Souls, now into Kalitas, Trader of Get. Not too big a problem for Siphoner, since I have Menace, and not too big a problem for Ludevic, since I have 4 toughness. But the life gain could be annoying, and if they have removal for my creatures, it could snowball relatively quickly. Sadly, I don't find a land, so I'm forced to Night's Whisper, and continue to not find a land, so I'm forced to just Inquisition. And Inquisition finds a fairly scary hand now. We have Jace the Mind Sculptor, Rishadan Port, Pithing Needle, Nissa, Natural State, and Jit. All of these are incredibly powerful cards. I think Jit is the worst one for me, because if they get that on Kalitas, they start murdering my creatures and gaining excess amounts of life with the lifelink, and it's just an overall bad time. Jace, again, Glint-Sleeve Siphoner is pretty good against Planeswalkers with my opponents on this low amount of creatures. Natural State is still not a problem. Pithing Needle is still not a problem, so this is pretty much a no-brainer for me. Jit is too dangerous to leave in the hand. Opponent tries to block, realizes that I have Menace, and backs up. I go up to 8 cards in hand, have to discard both Capsize and Fact or Fiction, but at least I found a land now. Nissa comes down and creates a token. My opponent chooses not to attack in, presumably hoping to double block the Siphoner, and they'll Rashad import one of my lands, to which I will go for the third there, Kalitas. At this point I can keep up Arcane Denial, Spellstutter Sprite, Shadow Doubt, and Impulse, so I'm feeling relatively happy now, and luckily for me that I do, because my opponent tries to play a Curse of Death's Hold. This is seeing more play in the metagame as far as I'm aware, and it's very, very good against me since it kills Siphoner here and turns off Ludevic. I'd be forced to attack in with Silas Friend with this hand, and that's a very, very slow clock, so I'm forced to counter that with Arcane Denial. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a chance this turn to hold up Shadow of Doubt for the Verdant Catacombs. I draw for Siphoner here, or Arcane Denial rather, Sword of Feast and Famine, and this is really a crucial point for this game. If I can draw an untapped land this turn and play Feast and Famine and attack in with it, it will really set me up to be very, very far ahead. Unfortunately, I do not get that. Instead, I get a Condescend. So I attack in regardless, get in the damage, get the draw with Siphoner, and with Ludevic. And I choose to reanimate the Kalitas. This is kind of dangerous play because it does cost me 4 life, and my opponent does have Jace the Mind Sculptor. I'm aware of that. They could bounce the Kalitas, but if they do that, it really leaves them open to getting their Jace killed. And for me, Jace is more threatening than their Kalitas, so I'm willing to try to bait that out from them. Further, if they play something beforehand, I can potentially Condescend it and be in the clear to gain a lot of life. Unfortunately, they played Jace before anything else. Bounce the Kalitas. I really can't pronounce names, but I've drawn a Hero's Downfall off of Ludevic, so I just kill Jace outright. Now at this point, I actually can play Sword of Feast and Famine, but I know that my opponent has Natural State here, and I can't equip while keeping up Spellstutter Sprite. So instead I'll play the Jit that I draw, and equip that. This could be huge for me because I can actually start gaining the life. That 4 life per attack is hugely relevant. This card is just insanely good. So I'm going to equip that to Siphoner and get in there since Ludevic is still better on the block. Getting in both obviously since they have no attackers. Unfortunately, as I attempt to Spellstutter Sprite paying down to 6 life, my opponent actually has a miscalculation as their extra card in hand. So that takes down the Jit, and I am down to 6 life to my opponent's 18 with 2 pain lands on board. And this is where I start to realize that I really need a less painful mana base because I've essentially dealt myself 24 damage this game, and that is a very scary thing to be the case. Opponent tries to tap down the Aqueduct, so I will Impulse Finding Cryptic Command. Very good for me since I'm planning on attacking with Sword of Feast and Famine this turn. I can hold that up while still playing cards on my turn. I'm going to equip that to the Siphoner since I'm planning on blocking the Kalitas with the Ludevic. I'll drop a land out of my opponent's hand and untap my own lands and draw that additional card. At this point, my opponent plays Leovold. For a moment, I forget that I can't counter it, but I cannot, in fact, counter it. They play Torpor Orb and Pithing Needle after combat, so their hand is now empty. They are safe against the sword, and they'll, of course, name sword for Pithing Needle. On my turn, I choose not to pay. I'm down to 3 life. I really can't take that risk. Paying the 1 life for Siphoner would mean I can't use my lands this turn. Instead, I'm going to play out my hand in preparation for the untap. So Duretti comes down, pluses. Gilded Drake comes down as just a 3/3 flyer with Torpor Orb on board. And I will attack in and untap. And at this point, I'm fairly safe from attacks. I have a fair number of blockers. I have Fatal Push if needed. Opponent plays Homeward Path, so I'm actually kind of glad that I couldn't use the Gilded Drake to its full extent there. And this is a very crucial block for this game. So I choose to block the token against Leovold and Ludevic against Kalitas. Because of this, I can actually kill both of these creatures. I have triggered Revolt with the token, and I have Cabal Pit to deal with Leovold. So Leovold will go down drawing a card, and I can Fatal Push the Kalitas. No reason to Cryptic Command there, obviously. So instead, this time I will pay the life, because I really need to hold on to the advantage that I have here. My opponent's down to 1 card that I can strip with the sword, and they don't really have anything thing going for them right now. They have Nissa, but the tokens don't matter to me. So I just need to find more interaction. What I find instead is Yawgmoth's Will. And Yawgmoth's Will isn't fantastic here. Most likely all it's going to be doing is getting Jit from the graveyard. But my opponent sees this and knows that I'm going to get it full on tap with all these cards in my graveyard, and just scoops right there with myself at 2 life, probably going down to 1 this turn. So, I think this was a pretty good demonstration of what this deck is intending to do outside of the Silas friend interaction, which was pretty irrelevant this game. You're trying to go very, very low to the ground. You might have saw my curve earlier, is certainly a curve centered around 2 mana, and just try to interact with my opponent faster than they can get card advantage, and just keep getting in with these small attackers and gain that incremental value off of Ludevic. Cool deck, fun game against not a particularly good matchup, and I did go down to effectively 1 life, so that was a fun one. Hope you enjoyed, and have a good night.